And now, two pigeons who can't believe how good humans have it with DirecTV.
These humans are hopping from streaming apps to live sports without batting a wing.
All from the DirecTV home screen.
With just one click, you could be watching a baseball game, a movie on Netflix,
or a critically acclaimed documentary.
You watch documentaries?
I love the ones that leave you with a question.
What?
Exactly.
DirecTV, a better way to watch whatever you want to watch. Visit DirecTV.com.
Internet-connected Gemini device, separate Netflix membership, and additional paid subscriptions required for third-party apps.
Today on CityCast DC, we've talked a lot about what Trump and Musk's gutting of the federal workforce means for the district, but what about nearby Virginia? Michael Pope, a reporter with Virginia Public Radio and the host of the Virginia Pressroom podcast, has been following the story and is here to break it down. Today's Tuesday, March 4th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be back.
So Virginia's governor, Governor Glenn Youngkin, has been very vocal about how the government needs to downsize. So he agrees with Trump and Musk and Doge. But as we know, it has affected a ton of his constituents. How has Youngkin been publicly navigating his support for Trump and also acknowledging Virginia's reliance on federal jobs?
Well, he has said publicly that he feels the pain of these federal employees. So there's a little bit of kind of Bill Clinton era, I feel your pain here. I mean, which is important, sort of being the emotional center for Virginia. In terms of how he's actually responding to the situation, two things that are worth thinking about. One is he's part of this group of Republican governors who have formed this group under the umbrella of the Republican Governors Association. So, he is sort of working with a group as in terms of reacting as a state. And then also there's this website that he has created, an online job fair, essentially a bulletin board. Critics call it kind of a LinkedIn response to the crisis, but he is taking some action.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How effective have resources like that been for these displaced Virginia workers?
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, we're still really in the early stages of all of this. I mean, one thing that was a theme of this emergency committee meeting, so this is not the governor's reaction, but the members of the General Assembly reacted to all of this by putting together a committee. This is what they do, like, let's put together a committee. So the emergency committee met on the last day of the General Assembly session last month. And the theme was, we don't know what we don't know, right? I mean, obviously, lots of people are going to be seeking unemployment benefits. How many of those people? We don't really know. And people might end up being kicked off of Medicaid. How many people? We don't know. How much is that going to cost? Will Virginia have to step in and finance the health care for people who get kicked off of Medicaid? I mean, there are many sort of offshoots of how this thing is going to play out.
I want to talk a bit more about that. What are Virginia's current unemployment benefits like generally? Like, is it a bad state to find yourself unemployed in?
Well, this is a system, keep in mind, that is just coming out of the strains of the pandemic. You will recall in the early days of the pandemic, many people lost their jobs, and suddenly many people were seeking unemployment benefits, and the system buckled under the weight of that and had some problems distributing unemployment benefits. But in the long run, they got their act together, and this is a system that is still kind of going through the after-action report for 2020 and how they reacted to that. So the people who run unemployment benefits and the insurance made a presentation during this emergency committee on the last day of the General Assembly session. So this is something that lawmakers are certainly following, and obviously the governor is following this too, because he is hoping that people who lose their jobs in the federal government might take up some kind of employment in Virginia.
All right, so let's talk about Virginia workers. How are they responding to all this? I cannot imagine that they love having their governor be like, it's fine if you lose your job, you'll just get another job someplace else. I can't imagine that's going down easy. How are they feeling?
They're hearing about it in their town halls. All these members of Congress, the Republicans and also the Democrats are hearing about this in their town halls, from federal employees, relatives. I mean, keep in mind there are, families that revolve around an income from the federal government. And then there's also this sort of other issue of what about contractors? So people who don't necessarily work for the federal government, but they're contractors, do they get unemployment insurance? This is actually up in the air. At the very end of the General Assembly session, the Senate had an extended debate about whether or not contractors should be able to get unemployment benefits. And they eventually came to the conclusion they don't have the money to do that. I mean, that's really kind of where we're headed with this. And everybody is expecting a special session later this year to figure out the money part of this. How much money is going to be needed on unemployment, on Medicaid expansion, sort of picking up the slack where the federal government is no longer making those kinds of investments.
Ever wondered why mosquitoes bite you? Or maybe you're curious about policy, like solving the housing shortage or bridging the digital divide. Or maybe you want to hear it all. After the Fact, a podcast by Pew, breaks down today's big issues with expert insights and real stories. Whether you're into the research or the personal stories behind it, we've got you covered. Get the stories behind the stats. Listen to After the Fact wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Northern Virginia really relies on federal workers' taxes as part of their budgets. What does this do to all of that?
Well, where I live in Alexandria, I like to follow my local budget process. And, listeners to this podcast are probably familiar with this whole thing where there's a series of public hearings and they meet about infrastructure and they meet about transportation. And there's like a dozen of these meetings. And then there are work sessions and then there are budget memos and questions. And this is a process that has started for all of your local jurisdictions across Northern Virginia. And they are really in a spot right now because they've got to figure out a way to balance the books without really knowing how much money they're going to get from the federal government. So if you think about the school system, for example, lots of money, especially for low-income children, comes from the federal government. And so when your local school system is writing its budget, which is happening right now in every jurisdiction, they are really going to be in a spot because they don't know how much money is going to come from the federal government. They've got to make a guess. I mean, they've got to have a document that they present to their, city council or board of supervisors. So right now you have school officials all over Virginia making guesses as to how much money they're going to get from the federal government when they don't know. They really don't know how much money they're going to get from the federal government. It's a huge problem for local governments who are right now in the process of writing their budgets to be in the situation where they have no clue how much money they're going to get or where it's going to come from.
Well, yeah, so just to say that back to you, we really don't know what the expected financial impact that cuts could have on the economy of places like Northern Virginia and the state more generally.
Yeah, and that is expressed across all kinds of employees. I mean, and all kinds of zip codes as well. I mean, my friend Jeff Shapiro is a columnist at the Richmond Times-Dispatch. He pointed out that Governor Youngkin's personal fortune was built on his time with the Carlyle Group, which became successful financially for, making money from the federal government, contracting, being part of the Northern Virginia business, government, financial situation. Youngkin himself has a personal fortune that's amassed by this exact situation that we're dealing with right now. So this is people who are very high income that are dealing with this, all the way down to, low-income people who are going to suffer because the local school system no longer has the funding that it used to.
What kind of political pressure is Youngkin facing from lawmakers in Virginia, particularly those who are representing places like Northern Virginia?
Well, the Democrats control the House of Delegates and the Democrats control the state Senate. So this is a General Assembly that is 100% in the control of the Democrats. And the people who represent Northern Virginia representing their constituents are very mad about this. Actually, we heard during the General Assembly lots of discussion. I mentioned already, Medicaid expansion, dealing with the financial strains there, the emergency committee. But this is an issue that actually hung in the background of all kinds of other issues. For example, there was a lot of debate about putting cameras all over the place, like speed cameras and stoplight cameras, and putting surveillance cameras on the interstate. And would that information about your car be available to your local police, your local sheriff? What about, is that information available to federal immigration officials who are trying to do mass deportation? I mean, it wasn't just a money issue. It sort of hung in the background of everything that was under discussion in the recent General Assembly session.
I wonder, how does your average Virginian, the person who maybe now is feeling anxious about the economy, anxious about losing their job, how are they feeling about the job that Youngkin has done representing Virginians? Because I never thought I would see the day where a governor of a state would be like, it's fine if you lose your jobs. Jobs is like the one thing you can count on for a lawmaker to talk about protecting. They want their citizenry to have jobs.
Especially governors. The biggest thing for governors is jobs, bringing jobs to their state.
So when a governor gets up in front of people and says, actually, it's fine if you lose your job, you'll get another job, it'll be fine, here's a website, how does that hit for Virginians?
Well, it depends on where you are and sort of what your thoughts on the federal government are. Let's keep in mind, lots of people out there think the federal government is bloated and look at these events with some celebration, right? Trump did not win Virginia, but there are many Trump voters in Virginia. And are they looking at this and, cheering it on? And you asked also a related question, which is, what do they think about Youngkin and how Youngkin is dealing with this? There was recently a poll from Rona College last week that had Governor Youngkin's approval rating right at 50%. And the unapproval was below that, like maybe 48% or something like that. In other words, he did not have a majority support, but he was, more in favor than opposed to Governor Youngkin. So that's an indication that he's actually doing better in the minds of Virginians than Trump and the Trump administration. Youngkin has been consistently pretty popular the entire time he's been governor.
For whatever reason, I thought that in this conversation, you would tell me that there is a clear majority of Virginians who do not like this. And I guess you're saying that, it's kind of holding half and half about. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so this polling data from Rona College was really interesting because the survey was done among, people in Virginia. And one of the big items to come out of that was that people support this mass deportation program. I mean, there was a very large percentage of the people that supported the administration's efforts to remove people who are not in the country legally. And it was way over 50%. I think it might have been over 60%. It's important to realize that lots of people are very angry about what's going on, and lots of people oppose the Trump administration and would like to see Youngkin move in a different direction or maybe even show some independence from the Trump administration. But the polling data also shows that Youngkin is popular and mass deportation has widespread support.
Having covered Youngkin for a while, do you think that there's a red line that might compel him to show some independence and break from Trump? If there was a certain level of economic damage being done to Virginia, or constituent anger where you had people screaming at him at town hall meetings, do you ever see him breaking from Trump?
Well, let's remember the backstory here, which is that Youngkin did not really embrace Trump during his 2021 campaign for governor. The only appearance the two of them did together was a telephone town hall that wasn't even open to the public. It was only open to Republican bigwigs. And so the reason I bring all this up is he did not campaign with Trump. He did not campaign for governor of Virginia as being a Trumpy person. In fact, just the opposite, really. He had the approval and support of Trump, but he was intentionally did not emphasize that. That has changed. Now, Youngkin is publicly embracing Trump and the administration. And so your question is there a line where he would break? Given his past kind of quasi-independence from Trump, maybe we could see something like that emerge in the future.
What do you think caused that change from him not really publicly aligning with Trump in 2020 to today?
He won the election.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Virginia has a governor's race coming up, and we know that Youngkin can't run again. Are folks running on this issue specifically?
Holy cow, it's gotten interesting in Virginia politics because, if we were to be recording this episode last week, the Republican candidate for governor would be the Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Earl Sears, and she had it all locked up and she was the candidate. Just in the last week, there have been two Republican opponents to emerge that basically both of them are saying, Winsome Sears, you're not Trumpy enough. The former delegate Dave LaRocque is running to bring kind of a Doge aspect to reform Virginia government. And then former state senator Amanda Chase is also announcing that she intends to run for governor. So, like I said, as of last week, Winsome Sears had it all locked up to herself, but now she's got two candidates on her right saying that she's not Trumpy enough, and she, criticized Trump, which is an unpardonable sin, according to many Republicans. So, yes, this is an issue that actually will dominate the Republican primary for governor, and that is in June. Keep in mind, Virginia has these odd year elections, so this Republican primary for governor is going to be in June, and the Trump administration is going to be the centerpiece. Keep in mind, there is no Democratic primary. Abigail Spanberger has that all locked up to herself. There was some talk about Congressman Bobby Scott potentially being a candidate in the Democratic primary. I think that has waned. And so at this point, we've got former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger as the lone candidate for the Democratic primary for governor. So we don't really have much of a campaign there. But the June primary for Republican nomination to be governor is going to be epic and one to watch.
What do you see happening to Youngkin after all of this?
So there has been some talk about him joining the Trump administration. I don't see that happening. There has also been some talk about him running for Congress. Keep in mind, Mark Warner is up for re-election in 2026. And so we could see a situation where former Governor Youngkin goes up against incumbent Senator Mark Warner, which I think would be a really interesting race because they have such a similar profile. Both of them are like super wealthy dudes who live in Northern Virginia, whose first gig in politics was being governor of Virginia.
I'm curious about that. Why is that so the dynamic where you have these wealthy, and it's not just wealthy, it's like, I'm from Virginia. It's like a certain kind of Virginia wealth. Like I'm wearing a
horse country
half-zip vest.
Horse country Virginia
horse wealth. Why do you see that in Virginia so often, where it's these horse country Virginia wealthy white men who are leading a state where not everybody is that economic status? Do you know what I mean? It's like a very specific dynamic that I see playing out in Virginia.
It's a specific dynamic that has a very old history. I mean, think about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. These are all horse country wealthy Virginia dudes.
Oh, that's such a good point. Well, Michael Pope, thank you for breaking all of this down for us. Let's get a couple of sweater vests and see where it goes.
It was good talking again. Thanks.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.